Hey, wild hearts. What happens when sworn enemies can't keep their claws, or their eyes, off each other? When ancient pack grudges collide with forbidden desire, and the last person you should ever trust becomes the only one who can set your soul on fire. Welcome to a world where hate and love are separated by a razor's edge, and crossing that line could destroy everything you've ever known. Chapter 1. The scent hit me before I even crossed into shadow pine territory. Wild cedar, mountain rain, and something dangerously intoxicating that made my wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. I should have turned back the moment I caught that familiar smell on the wind. Should have honored the treaty boundaries that had kept our packs from each other's throats for the past 5 years. But Kira Blackwood had something that belonged to me. My boots crushed fallen pine needles as I stalked through the ancient forest, every sense hyper-alert. The Shadow Pine Pack's territory felt different from our Iron Moon lands, wilder, more untamed, like they'd never quite learned the art of control.
Just like their alpha.
A branch snapped behind me. I spun, fangs already extending, but found only shadows dancing between the towering pines. The forest felt alive with watchers, yet none dared show themselves. Cowards. The Shadow Pines had always preferred ambush tactics to honorable confrontation. "You're trespassing, Iron Moon." The voice cut through the silence like a blade, low and smoky with just enough growl to raise every instinct I possessed. Kira Blackwood stepped out from behind a massive cedar, and despite 5 years of bitter rivalry, my breath still caught in my throat. She was exactly as I remembered, and completely changed all at once. Still tall and lethal, with that confident predator's stance that had intimidated lesser wolves since we were teenagers. Her dark hair was longer now, falling in waves past her shoulders, and her amber eyes held depths of power that hadn't been there when we were both fighting for our father's approval. But it was the way she looked at me, like I was prey she couldn't decide whether to devour or toy with first, that sent heat racing down my spine. "Hello, Kira." I kept my voice level controlled. "Everything she wasn't. You have something of mine." Her full lips curved into that maddening smirk I'd seen in far too many dreams. "Do I? How interesting." Last I checked, nothing in Shadow Pine territory belonged to an Iron Moon wolf. She was baiting me, and we both knew it. The smart play would be to state my business and leave. The safe play would be to have sent an emissary instead of coming myself. But Marcus Rivera had never been accused of taking the safe play. "My pack's hunting rights to the northern valleys," I said, taking a deliberate step forward. "The ones your wolves have been poaching from for the past month." Poaching. Kira's eyes flashed gold, the first sign her wolf was responding to the challenge. "That's a serious accusation, Rivera. One that suggests you think the Shadow Pines are thieves." Another step closer. Close enough now to see the pulse beating at her throat, to catch the subtle shift in her scent that meant her control wasn't quite as perfect as she wanted me to believe. "I don't think it, Blackwood. I know it. We've found your wolf scent markers all over elk kills in our territory. Either you've lost control of your pack, or you're deliberately violating the Moonridge Accords." The temperature in the forest seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kira's amber eyes went completely gold, and when she spoke, it was with the full authority of an alpha whose word was law. "Choose your next words very carefully, Marcus. Because accusing me of breaking treaty terms is the same as calling for war." My wolf surged forward, responding to the challenge in her voice, the power radiating from her in waves. This was what I'd missed during our 5 years of careful distance, the intoxicating dance of matching wills with the one person who'd never backed down for me. Maybe that's exactly what I'm doing. The words hung between us like a lit fuse. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then Kira was closing the distance between us in 3 swift strides, stopping just inches from my chest. Close enough that I could feel the heat of her body, smell the wild sweetness beneath her anger. "You think you can come into my territory, make demands of me like I'm some submissive beta?" Her voice was a whisper, deadly quiet. "You think 5 years of playing nice means I've gone soft?" "I think," I said, leaning down until my lips were nearly brushing her ear, "that you're exactly as dangerous as you've always been." And I think you've been waiting for an excuse to stop pretending we don't want to tear each other apart. Her sharp intake of breath was answer enough. But then she was stepping back, that infuriating smirk returning as she regained her composure with the speed that had always made her such a formidable opponent. How refreshingly honest. But if you want those hunting rights back, you'll have to do better than empty threats and sexual tension, Rivera. The northern valleys are ours now. We claimed them fair and square when your patrols failed to mark them properly. My hands clenched into fists. Those valleys have been Iron Moon territory for 3 generations. Were, she corrected. Past tense. Your father got lazy in his old age, stopped sending proper patrols. Territory that isn't defended doesn't belong to anyone. The mention of my father hit like a physical blow. He'd been dead for barely a year, killed in the rogue attack that had left me Alpha before I was ready. The same attack that had decimated our patrol schedules while we rebuilt. Kira's eyes narrowed as she read my expression. Oh, did I hit a nerve? Poor little Alpha, still playing catch-up after Daddy's mistakes. I moved before conscious thought kicked in, covering the distance between us and backing her against the nearest tree. My forearm pressed against her throat, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make my point. Don't, I growled, letting my wolf's voice bleed through. Talk about my father. But instead of fear or submission, Kira's eyes lit up with something wild and fierce. Her hands came up to grip my jacket, pulling me closer instead of pushing me away. There he is, she whispered, voice rough with something that definitely wasn't fear. The real Marcus Rivera, not the diplomat your pack's been trying to turn you into. I was wondering when he'd show up. The scent of her arousal hit me like a drug, and for one insane moment, I forgot we were enemies. Forgot everything except the way her body felt pressed against mine, the challenge in her amber eyes, the soft sound she made when I leaned in closer. A howl echoed through the forest, long, low, and unmistakably a warning. Shadow Pine Patrol, close enough to scent the confrontation. Reality crashed back in. I jerked away from Kira like she'd burned me, putting several feet of safe distance between us. This isn't over. I managed, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. Kira straightened slowly, smoothing her jacket with deliberate calm. But I caught the tremor in her hands, the way she avoided meeting my eyes directly. No, she agreed quietly. It isn't. The Pack Council meets in 3 days to discuss territory disputes. If you want those hunting rights back, Rivera, you'll have to come and take them. Properly this time. She turned to go, then paused, glancing back over her shoulder with that devastating smile. And Marcus? Next time you want to pin me against a tree, you'd better be prepared to follow through. Then she was gone, melting back into the shadows like she'd never been there at all. Only her lingering scent and the racing of my pulse proved the encounter had been real. I stood there for long minutes, trying to get my breathing under control, trying to forget the way she'd felt in my arms. The way she'd looked at me like she wanted to devour me whole. 3 days. She'd given me 3 days to figure out how to reclaim what was mine without starting a war that would destroy both our packs. 3 days to forget the taste of her scent on my tongue and the challenge in her eyes. 3 days to remember why Kira Blackwood was my enemy, not my obsession. I had a feeling it wouldn't be nearly enough. Chapter 2. The Moonridge Council chambers hadn't seen this much tension since the territorial wars of my grandfather's time. Ancient wooden beams stretched overhead, carved with the symbols of all 5 regional packs, while afternoon sunlight slanted through tall windows to illuminate the circular arrangement of chairs that had hosted decades of uneasy truces. I'd arrived early, claiming the seat that faced the main entrance, a strategic position that would let me watch every wolf who entered. The Iron Moon delegation flanked me, my beta, Jake Morrison, whose steady presence had kept me sane through the chaos of early leadership, my tracker, Elena Vasquez, whose nose could follow a 3-day-old trail through a thunderstorm, and my uncle, Thomas Rivera, whose silver hair and scarred hands spoke of battles fought before I was born. You sure about this approach, Marcus? Jake's low voice carried just enough doubt to tighten my jaw. Challenging her publicly, it's risky. Everything about dealing with Kira Blackwood is risky. I muttered, adjusting my leather jacket and trying not to think about how her hands had gripped it 3 days ago. But she's the one who made this a public matter. She wants to play pack politics?
Fine.
We'll play. Uncle Thomas snorted. That girl's been trouble since she could walk. Too much fire, not enough sense. Her father should have married her off to a more stable pack years ago. Lucky for us he didn't, Elena observed, her dark eyes tracking every entrance. A mated alpha would be harder to rattle. Kira fights angry, and angry wolves make mistakes.
I wasn't so sure about that.
3 days of replaying our encounter had convinced me that Kira Blackwood didn't make mistakes. She made calculated risks that looked like mistakes to everyone else. The difference was crucial and dangerous. The chamber doors opened with a resonant thud, and the Shadowpine delegation entered like they owned the place. Which, technically, they did. Moonridge had been built on neutral ground claimed by their pack 2 centuries ago. Kira walked in first, and every conversation in the room died. She dressed for war in a way that made my mouth go dry. Black leather pants that hugged every curve, knee-high boots that added inches to her already impressive height, and a deep green silk shirt that brought out the gold flecks in her amber eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that exposed the elegant line of her throat, the same throat I'd pressed my arm against in a moment of pure, stupid instinct. Our eyes met across the chamber, and that familiar electricity crackled between us. She smiled, not the mocking smirk from the forest, but something slower and more dangerous that made my wolf pace restlessly. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent room. "I hope you haven't been waiting long." Her beta, David Chen, took the seat to her right, a compact man with intelligent eyes who'd been her second since they were teenagers. To her left sat Sarah Winters, her head tracker, a woman whose reputation for ruthless efficiency was matched only by her loyalty to her alpha. The fourth member of their delegation was a surprise, Elena Blackwood, Kira's great-aunt, whose presence lent formal weight to whatever they were planning. "Alpha Blackwood," I acknowledged, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to mediate this dispute through proper channels." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world, Rivera." She settled into her chair with feline grace, leaning back like she was preparing to enjoy a show. "It's not often someone accuses the Shadowpines of theft. I'm curious to see how you plan to prove such a bold claim." Counsel Elder Morrison, no relation to my beta, cleared his throat from the mediator's position. At 87, he was one of the few wolves old enough to remember the last territorial wars, and his presence meant this dispute was being taken seriously by the supernatural community. "We're here to address Alpha Rivera's claim that Shadowpine wolves have been hunting illegally in traditionally Iron Moon territory," Morrison began, his gravelly voice carrying decades of authority. "Alpha Rivera, present your evidence." I stood, pulling out the photographs Elena had taken of paw prints, scent markers, and kill sites. For the past month, my pack has found clear evidence of Shadowpine wolves hunting in the northern valleys of our territory. Elk kills with your pack's distinctive throat-tearing technique. Scent markers that are definitely Shadowpine, placed deliberately near our established boundaries. I set the photos on the central table where everyone could see them. These valleys have been Iron Moon hunting grounds for 3 generations. The Moonridge Accords specifically protect traditional territories, even if patrol schedules become irregular due to pack emergencies. Kira's great-aunt leaned forward, studying the photos with sharp eyes. "These scent markers, how old were they when you found them?" "No more than a week," Elena answered, her tracker's expertise lending weight to the testimony. "Fresh enough to indicate ongoing territorial incursion, not accidental border crossing." "Interesting." Elder Blackwood sat back, but I caught the satisfied gleam in her eyes that meant trouble. "Alpha Blackwood, how do you respond to these accusations?" Kira rose with fluid grace, every inch the commanding alpha. When she spoke, her voice carried the absolute confidence that had always been her most dangerous weapon. "The evidence is certainly compelling," she said, and my wolf perked up suspiciously at her reasonable tone. "It's clear that Shadowpine wolves have been in those valleys recently. What's also clear is that Alpha Rivera doesn't understand the difference between hunting and reclaiming. She moved to the photos, pointing at specific markers. These aren't poaching signs, Council. They're legitimate territorial claims on land that was abandoned by its previous occupants. Abandoned? Jake was on his feet before I could stop him. We never abandoned anything. Pack emergency protocols are not recognized under traditional territorial law. Kira cut him off smoothly. Territory belongs to the pack that actively patrols and defends it. When the Iron Moon pack failed to maintain proper presence in the northern valleys for over 6 months, that land reverted to neutral territory, which the Shadow Pines then claimed through proper traditional methods. The chamber erupted in angry voices. My uncle was shouting something about pack law, while David Chin was calmly reciting territorial statutes from memory. But I barely heard them over the roaring in my ears. She'd outmaneuvered me completely. Furthermore, Kira continued, her voice cutting through the chaos with alpha authority, I have documentation proving our claim was filed properly with the regional pack registry 3 weeks ago. Sarah Winters produced a thick folder, setting it beside my photographs. The official stamps and signatures looked devastatingly legitimate. Elder Morrison raised his hand for silence. This is unexpected. Alpha Rivera, were you aware that the northern valleys had been claimed by another pack? My throat felt like I'd swallowed ground glass. No, Elder Morrison. We were not notified of any territorial changes. Because notification is only required for active territorial disputes, Elena Blackwood said with poisonous sweetness. If a pack fails to patrol territory for 6 months, it's assumed they no longer consider it worth defending. The trap was springing shut around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Kira had used our grief, our weakness after my father's death, to steal our most valuable hunting grounds. And she'd done it all completely legally. However, Kira said, and that single word made me look up sharply. The Shadow Pines are not unreasonable. We understand that the Iron Moon pack has faced difficulties recently. Tragic difficulties that no pack should have to endure. Her amber eyes found mine across the table, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been sympathy. Or it might have been another calculated move in whatever game she was playing. Therefore, I'm prepared to offer a compromise. The chamber fell silent again, everyone leaning forward to hear what she had in mind. A contest, she continued, beginning to pace the space between our delegations. Traditional pack law allows for territorial disputes to be settled through trial by combat or trial by merit. Since we're civilized wolves in the 21st century, I suggest trial by merit. What kind of contest? I asked, though every instinct I possessed was screaming that this was another trap. A hunt, she said simply. 7 days, both packs working the same territory. Whoever brings down the largest prey wins permanent rights to the northern valleys. Uncle Thomas laughed harshly. You can't be serious. The Shadow Pines are half the size of our pack. You'd be at a severe disadvantage. Which is why it won't be pack versus pack, Kira replied smoothly. It will be alpha versus alpha. Marcus and me, alone in the wilderness, may the best wolf win. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. A hunt between rival alphas wasn't just a contest. It was a test of everything that made us what we were. Strength, speed, cunning, endurance, and the pure wild instinct that separated wolves from ordinary predators. It was also incredibly dangerous. Alphas pushed beyond their limits in hostile territory had been known to lose themselves completely to their wolf nature. Some never came back. Absolutely not, Jake said immediately. Marcus, this is insane. She's trying to get you alone and vulnerable. Am I? Kira's smile was all teeth. Afraid your alpha can't match a female wolf, Morrison? The insult hit its mark. Jake's eyes flashed gold, but I put a restraining hand on his arm before he could say something that would make this worse. What are the terms? I asked quietly. Kira's smile widened. 7 days in the Thornwood Reserve, neutral territory, no pack boundaries to worry about. We each hunt alone, no assistance from pack members. Whoever brings down the largest prey by sunset on the 7th day wins the northern valleys permanently. And if neither of us succeeds, then we share the territory 50-50, alternating seasons. She shrugged like it didn't matter to her either way. Though I doubt it will come to that. One of us will prove definitively who the superior hunter is. Elder Morrison was frowning deeply. This is highly irregular, Alpha Blackwood. Trial by merit usually involves the entire pack skills, not individual competition. Traditional law allows for alpha proxy in territorial disputes, Elena Blackwood countered. The alpha represents the pack's ultimate capability. Besides, this was Alpha Rivera's challenge to begin with. Surely, he's not going to back down now. Every eye in the chamber turned to me. I could feel the weight of expectation, the challenge in Kira's amber gaze, the worry radiating from my own pack members. 7 days alone with Kira Blackwood in the wilderness. 7 days of hunting, surviving, and trying to prove I was the better wolf while fighting the attraction that had been driving me crazy for years. 7 days that could end with me losing our ancestral hunting grounds forever, or losing myself to desires that could destroy both our packs. I should refuse. Should demand a different contest, more witnesses, safer terms. Instead, I heard myself saying, I accept. Kira's triumphant smile was the last thing I saw before chaos erupted in the chamber again. Chapter 3. The Thornwood Reserve stretched before us like a primeval nightmare, all twisted oak and shadowed hollows where sunlight never quite managed to penetrate. Ancient trees rose like cathedral pillars, their canopy so thick it turned midday into permanent twilight. This was wild country, the kind of place where civilization was just a distant memory and only the strongest predators survived. Perfect territory for a hunt that could destroy us both. I adjusted my pack one final time, checking the minimal supplies council law allowed. Basic camping gear, emergency medical kit, and a GPS beacon for true emergencies only. Everything else would have to come from skill, instinct, and the wolf that paced restlessly beneath my human skin. Having second thoughts? Kira's voice carried a hint of mockery as she approached through the morning mist, her own pack slung casually over one shoulder. I turned to face her, and my breath caught despite everything. She'd traded her council meeting leathers for practical hunting gear, dark cargo pants, fitted tank top, and boots designed for serious wilderness travel. But it was the way she moved that got to me, that fluid predator's grace that spoke of absolute confidence in her abilities. Just planning my victory speech, I replied, forcing my voice to stay level. Should I mention how gracious a loser you were? Her laugh was pure wicked delight. Oh, Rivera. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Elder Morrison approached with the official timekeeper, a stern-faced woman whose job was to witness the formal beginning of our contest. Behind them, both our packs had gathered at the tree line, staying well back from the reserve boundary, but close enough to see us off. Jake caught my eye and tapped his watch, the universal signal for don't do anything stupid. Too late for that advice, but I appreciated the sentiment. Alpha Rivera, Alpha Blackwood. Elder Morrison intoned formally. You are about to enter 7 days of trial by merit. The rules are simple. Hunt alone, bring down your prey through your own skill, and present your kill at sunset on the 7th day. The Alpha, who claims the largest prey, wins permanent territorial rights to the disputed northern valleys. We understand, Kira said, her amber eyes never leaving mine. Furthermore, Morrison continued, any Alpha who fails to appear at the appointed time and place forfeits automatically. Any Alpha who requires rescue forfeits automatically. And any Alpha who attempts to sabotage their opponent will be stripped of pack standing permanently. The weight of those words settled over us both. This wasn't just about hunting rights anymore. Our reputations, our leadership, our very identities as Alphas were on the line. Do you both accept these terms? Accepted, we said in unison, our voices carrying the formal power that made it a binding oath. Morrison stepped back, raising his hand. Then let the hunt begin at the sound of the horn. The ancient hunting horn's call echoed through the forest, primal and haunting. As the sound faded, Kira and I stood facing each other across 10 feet of mossy ground, both of us vibrating with the need to move, to hunt, to prove ourselves. See you in 7 days, Rivera, she said softly. Try not to get eaten by anything too embarrassing. Same to you, Blackwood. Though I'm betting you're more likely to be the one doing the eating. Her pupils dilated slightly at my words, and for one charged moment, I wondered if we were still talking about hunting. Then she was gone, vanishing into the forest with the silence of a born predator. I watched the spot where she disappeared for a long moment, then turned and headed in the opposite direction, deeper into the Thornwood's ancient heart. The first day was about reconnaissance. I needed to learn the territory, identify game trails, and locate water sources before I could even think about hunting. The Thornwood was massive, nearly 50 square miles of pristine wilderness that hadn't seen human development since the pact treaties were signed. My wolf senses expanded as I moved through the undergrowth, cataloging scents and sounds. Deer, definitely. A small herd of elk somewhere to the north. Wild boar rooting in the deadfall near the creek beds. And underneath it all, the lingering scent of other predators, mountain lions, bears, and at least one wolf pack that used the reserve as neutral hunting grounds. Competition. This hunt would be about more than just Marcus versus Kira. I made camp that first night in a sheltered grove near a clear stream, building a small fire and settling in to plan my strategy. The smart move would be to go after one of the elk, large enough to win, common enough that I'd have multiple chances if my first attempt failed. But as I stared into the dancing flames, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Kira had smiled when she accepted my challenge. Like she knew something I didn't. Like she'd already won. A howl echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakably wild. The local pack, announcing their territory to any newcomers. I listened to the complex harmonies, picking out at least 6 distinct voices, and felt my own wolf respond with the urge to answer. But I held back. This wasn't my territory, and I wasn't here to make friends with the locals. I was here to prove I was the better hunter, the stronger alpha, the wolf who deserved those northern valleys. Another howl joined the pack song, higher, more musical, with an undertone of absolute authority that made my pulse quicken with recognition.
Kira.
She'd announced herself to the local pack, introduced herself as a visiting alpha with the confidence to run with them if she chose. It was a brilliant tactical move that would give her access to their knowledge of local prey while maintaining her status as a competitor. It was also incredibly dangerous. Wild packs didn't always welcome strangers, even alpha strangers. I found myself on my feet before I'd made the conscious decision to move, every protective instinct I possessed screaming at me to go to her aid. Which was insane. Kira Blackwood was my enemy, my rival, the wolf who'd stolen my territory and challenged my leadership. She was also alone in the wilderness with a pack of strangers whose intentions were completely unknown. The howling faded into silence, leaving only the crackle of my campfire and the thunder of my own heartbeat. I stood there for long minutes, torn between the smart choice and the right choice, before finally forcing myself to sit back down. Kira had made her decision. She could handle whatever consequences came with it. But sleep was a long time coming that night. Chapter 4. Day 3 dawned gray and misty, with the promise of rain in the heavy clouds that pressed down on the forest canopy. I'd spent the previous day tracking the elk herd, learning their patterns and identifying the best hunting spots. A mature bull had separated from the group, old enough to be substantial prey, young enough to still be a challenging hunt.
Perfect.
I was checking my gear when the scent hit me.
Blood.
Fresh, but not fresh enough to be from an active kill. And underneath the metallic tang, something that made my wolf surge forward in alarm.
Kira.
I was moving before conscious thought kicked in, following the scent trail through dense undergrowth and across a rocky creek bed. The smell grew stronger as I climbed a steep ridge, mixed now with something else. Infection, fever, the sick sweet smell of a wound that wasn't healing properly. I found her in a small clearing on the far side of the ridge, and my heart nearly stopped. She was conscious but barely, propped against a fallen log with her left leg extended awkwardly. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the makeshift bandage wrapped around her thigh, the dark stain that meant blood loss, the unhealthy flush on her pale cheeks that screamed infection. Kira. Her name came out rougher than I'd intended. Her head snapped up, amber eyes struggling to focus on me. When they did, Her expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and finally bitter resignation. "Come to gloat, Rivera?" Her voice was hoarse, but she still managed to inject venom into it. "Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not dead yet." I dropped my pack and moved closer, my wolf howling with the need to help, to heal, to protect. "What happened?" "Wild boar," she said with a weak attempt at her usual smirk. Turns out the local pack wasn't exaggerating about the size of the ones in the eastern ravine. Thing was the size of a small car, and about as friendly as a pissed-off grizzly. I knelt beside her, and she didn't pull away when I reached for the bandage. That alone told me how bad off she really was. The Kira I knew would never show weakness to an enemy. "Let me see." "Marcus, don't." But I was already unwrapping the makeshift dressing, and the sight underneath made me curse viciously. 3 parallel gashes ran from her mid-thigh to just above her knee, deep enough to need stitches and clearly infected despite her attempts at field treatment.
This is bad, Kira.
"You need medical attention. I need to finish this hunt." She tried to push my hands away, but she was too weak to stop me from examining the wounds more closely. "It's just a scratch. I've had worse." "Bullshit. This is infected, you've lost too much blood, and you're running a fever that could drop you into shock." I sat back on my heels, meeting her defiant stare with one of my own. "You need to call for evacuation." "Absolutely not." The flash of her old fire was reassuring, even if it was completely misplaced. "I forfeit if I need rescue. You know the rules." "The rules also say you forfeit if you're dead." "I'm not dying." But even as she said it, she swayed slightly, catching herself against the log with obvious effort. I looked at her, really looked, and saw what the injury and fever had cost her. Dark circles under her eyes, tremor in her hands, the careful way she was breathing that meant even small movements hurt. She might not be dying right now, but she would be soon if the infection spread. And despite everything between us, despite the territory she'd stolen and the challenge she'd thrown in my face, I couldn't let that happen. "Okay," I said, making a decision that would probably cost me everything. "New plan." "Marcus, what are you?" I was already pulling medical supplies from my pack, laying them out with efficient movements. "I'm going to clean and dress those wounds properly. You're going to let me, because you're smart enough to know you can't do it yourself with your hands shaking like that." "This is ridiculous. We're competitors. Enemies. You should be celebrating right now." "Maybe I should be." I agreed, ripping open antiseptic wipes with more force than necessary. "But I'm not going to win because you bled out from an infected wound. When I beat you, Blackwood, it's going to be because I'm the better hunter, not because you were too stubborn to accept help when you needed it." She stared at me for a long moment, something shifting in her amber eyes. "This is going to hurt," she said finally. "Yeah, it is. But not as much as losing your leg to gangrene." I started with the antiseptic, and she bit back a curse that would have made my uncle blush. But she didn't pull away, didn't tell me to stop, just gripped the fallen log with white-knuckled hands and let me work. The wounds were worse up close, deep, jagged, and showing all the signs of serious infection. I cleaned them as thoroughly as I could with field supplies, then applied antibiotic ointment and fresh bandages with the methodical care my pack medic had drilled into me during training. "There," I said finally, sitting back to survey my work. "That should hold you until you can get to a real doctor." "Thank you." The words were quiet, almost lost in the rustle of wind through the leaves above us. I looked up to find her watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, vulnerable, confused, like she was seeing me for the first time. "Don't thank me yet," I said, standing and shouldering my pack again. "You still need to get back to the boundary and call for evacuation." "I told you, I'm not forfeiting." "Kira."
No.
She struggled to her feet, using the log for support, and I had to resist the urge to steady her. "I came here to hunt, and I'm going to hunt. Infection or no infection, you're not getting rid of me that easily." "You can barely stand." "I can stand well enough to put an arrow through whatever crosses my path." She gestured to the compound bough she'd propped against a nearby tree. "Bough hunting doesn't require a lot of running around." I stared at her, caught between admiration for her determination and frustration at her stubbornness. "You're insane." "Probably. But I'm not giving up." She took a careful step forward, testing her balance. "The question is, are you going to try to stop me?" For a heartbeat, I considered it. I was stronger, faster, uninjured. I could easily prevent her from continuing the hunt, force her to seek medical attention whether she wanted to or not. But looking at her face, stubborn, proud, and absolutely determined, I realized I couldn't do it. This was who Kira Blackwood was at her core, a fighter who would never back down, never surrender, never accept defeat as long as she had breath in her body. It was what had made her my enemy. It was also what made her something else. Something I wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Fine," I said finally. "But if you collapse from blood loss, I'm dragging your unconscious ass back to the boundary personally." Her smile was the first genuine one I'd seen from her in years.
Deal.
"Now get out of here, Rivera. I have a hunt to finish." I turned to go, then paused. "Kira? For what it's worth, that was a hell of a thing you did, taking on a wild boar alone."
Yeah, well.
She was already settling back against the log, reaching for her bow with careful movements. "Someone's got to keep you honest." I left her there, injured but unbroken, and tried to ignore the way my wolf whined at the separation. Tried to forget the trust in her eyes when she let me tend her wounds, the vulnerability she'd shown that no one else had ever seen. 3 days left in the hunt, and everything had changed. The question was whether either of us would survive long enough to see how it ended.
Chapter 5.
The elk was perfect, a young bull, strong and healthy, with antlers that would make impressive trophy. I'd been tracking him for 2 days, learning his patterns, waiting for the right moment to make my move. Now, crouched in the pre-dawn darkness with my bow drawn and my target less than 30 yards away, victory was finally within reach. So, why couldn't I stop thinking about amber eyes and infected wounds? The elk lifted his head, nostrils flaring as he tested the wind. I held my breath, keeping perfectly still as he scanned the forest for threats. One wrong move, one stray sound, and he'd bolt faster than I could blink. Just like Kira would bolt if she knew what I'd been thinking about for the past day and a half. I'd told myself a dozen times that helping her had been pure strategy. Keep the competition fair, win through skill rather than circumstance, maintain my reputation as an honorable alpha. All perfectly logical reasons that had nothing to do with the way she'd looked at me when I cleaned her wounds, or the trust in her voice when she'd let me help her. Nothing to do with the fact that I'd been worried sick about her ever since. The elk stepped forward, presenting a perfect broadside shot. 40 pounds of draw weight, razor-sharp broadhead, years of training and natural predator instinct all focused on this one moment. I released. The arrow flew true, taking the elk cleanly through the heart. He stumbled, ran perhaps 20 yards, then collapsed in a clearing where the morning sun would make him easy to find when the judges came to measure. It should have felt like victory. Instead, all I could think about was whether Kira was still alive. "Damn it," I muttered, lowering my bow and admitting what I'd been trying to ignore for days. I cared about her. More than cared about her, if I was being honest. Somewhere between our heated confrontation in her territory and the moment she'd let me tend her injuries, everything had changed. The woman I'd thought was my enemy had become something infinitely more dangerous. She'd become someone I couldn't stop thinking about. I took GPS coordinates of my kill and headed deeper into the forest, ostensibly to scout for even larger prey, but really because I couldn't shake the feeling that Kira was in trouble. I found her 2 hours later, and the sight nearly stopped my heart. She was perched 15 feet up in an ancient oak, balanced precariously on a thick branch with her bow in her hands and her injured leg dangling at an awkward angle. Below her, 3 massive shapes paced in agitated circles, wild boars, each easily 300 pounds of muscle, tusk, and bad temper. "You've got to be kidding me," I breathed. At the sound of my voice, Kira's head snapped toward me. Even from a distance, I could see the relief that flashed across her face before she quickly masked it with her usual bravado. "Rivera," she called out, trying to sound casual despite the obvious desperation of her situation. Fancy meeting you here. How's your hunt going? Better than yours, apparently. I studied the boars, noting the way they kept testing the tree trunk with their snouts. Please tell me you have a plan for getting down from there. Working on it, she said, though the slight tremor in her voice suggested otherwise. These bastards showed up about an hour ago. I think they're the same family group I tangled with before. They seem to have developed a personal grudge. One of the boars, a massive sow with scars across her snout, looked up at Kira with unmistakable malice. If I didn't know better, I'd say the animal was holding a grudge. They can't climb, I pointed out. You could wait them out, in theory. Kira shifted carefully on the branch, and I caught the wince she tried to hide. In practice, my leg is cramping up, I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I'm pretty sure this branch isn't going to hold my weight much longer. As if to emphasize her point, the oak creaked ominously under her shifting weight. I should have walked away. Should have left her to solve her own problem while I went back to my successful hunt and certain victory. It was what any smart competitor would do. Instead, I found myself unsling my bow and nocking an arrow. What are you doing? Kira demanded. Probably something stupid. I drew the bowstring back, sighting on the largest boar. When I take the shot, you drop down and run. Your injured leg won't hold up to a prolonged chase, so make sure you get clear on the first try. Marcus, no. If you fire that arrow, you'll spook them, and there's no guarantee you'll drop the big one clean. Then we'll both be stuck dealing with 3 pissed-off boars instead of just me. She was right, and we both knew it. But I couldn't stand here and watch her fall from that tree, couldn't walk away knowing she might not survive the next few minutes. Got a better idea? I asked. Actually, yes. She adjusted her grip on her own bow, drawing an arrow from her hip quiver. They're focused on me, which means they're not paying attention to you. If you can get behind that fallen log about 10 yards to your left, you'll have a clear shot at the sow. Take her down, and the other 2 will probably scatter. And if they don't scatter? Her smile was pure predator, despite her precarious position. Then we find out how good we are at working as a team. The word team sent an unexpected jolt through me. When was the last time someone had talked about working with me as an equal, rather than following my orders as alpha? On 3? I asked. On 3. She drew back her bowstring, taking aim at one of the smaller boars. 1, 2. I was already moving, using every bit of wolf stealth to circle around to the fallen log she'd indicated. The boars were so focused on their treed prey that they never noticed the new threat approaching from behind. 3. We fired simultaneously. Her arrow took the smaller boar through the neck, dropping it instantly. Mine caught the massive sow just behind the shoulder, piercing the heart. The third boar looked around in confusion as his family members collapsed, then caught my scent and charged with a squeal of rage. Move! Kira shouted, dropping from the tree with more grace than should have been possible with her injury. I rolled sideways as the boar thundered past, already knocking another arrow. But Kira was faster, putting a second arrow through the charging animal's skull before it could turn for another pass. Silence fell over the forest, broken only by our heavy breathing and the creak of branches in the wind. Not bad, Rivera, Kira said, limping over to examine her kills. Though I think my 2 boars outweigh your 1 elk. I stared at her. You're seriously keeping score right now? We're in a competition. Of course I'm keeping score. But she was smiling as she said it, the first genuinely relaxed expression I'd seen from her since the hunt began. Besides, she continued, pulling her arrows free and checking them for damage, someone needs to keep your ego in check. Can't have you thinking you're some kind of knight in shining armor just because you helped a damsel in distress. Damsel in distress? I couldn't help laughing. Kira, you just dropped a 300-pound boar with a single arrow while balancing on a tree branch with an infected leg wound. If that's distressed, I'd hate to see you when you're really trying. The compliment caught her off guard. I saw the surprise flicker across her face before she quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in checking her bowstring. Yeah, well, she muttered. Don't get used to it. This was a one-time team-up, emergency circumstances only. But as we worked together to field dress our kills, I couldn't help noticing how naturally we fell into sync. She anticipated my movements, handed me tools before I asked for them, and matched my efficiency with her own practice skill. We worked well together. Better than well, we worked like we'd been hunting partners for years instead of enemies for decades. Marcus. Her voice was quieter now, serious. What you did back there, helping me with the infection, now this, why? I looked up from the boar I was cleaning, meeting her amber eyes across the clearing. The question I'd been asking myself for days was written all over her face, and I realized she deserved an honest answer. Because, I said slowly, somewhere between you stealing my territory and challenging me to this hunt, I stopped seeing you as just my enemy. What do you see me as now? The loaded question hung between us like a challenge of a different kind. I could deflect, make a joke, keep things safely antagonistic between us. Or I could tell her the truth that had been eating at me for days. I see you as the most dangerous woman I've ever met, I said quietly. And the most fascinating. And the one person who's never backed down from me. Never treated me like I was fragile or needed protection. Never made me feel like anything less than an equal. Her breath caught audibly. Marcus. I know it's crazy, I continued, unable to stop now that I'd started. I know we're supposed to be enemies. I know our packs would probably disown us both if they knew I was standing here wanting to kiss you instead of trying to beat you. You want to kiss me? The words came out barely above a whisper. Every damn day since you pinned me against that tree in your territory and told me to follow through next time. The silence stretched between us, loaded with years of unspoken tension and days of growing attraction. Kira's pupils were dilated, her breathing shallow, and I could smell the subtle shift in her scent that meant desire. This is a bad idea, she said finally. Terrible idea, I agreed, taking a step closer. Our packs would lose their minds. Completely. Another step. And we're still competitors. This doesn't change anything about the hunt. Nothing at all. Close enough now to see the gold flecks in her amber eyes, to feel the heat radiating from her skin. Good, she breathed. As long as we're clear on that. Then she was reaching for me, her hands fisting in my shirt to pull me down to her level, and I was finally discovering what Kira Blackwood tasted like. The answer was wild honey and storm winds, with an undertone of something uniquely her that made my wolf howl with satisfaction. She kissed like she did everything else, with absolute commitment, no half measures, holding nothing back. I backed her against the nearest tree, my hands threading through her dark hair as she nipped at my lower lip with just enough teeth to make me groan. She tasted like forbidden things and dangerous choices, and I couldn't get enough. This is still a terrible idea, she mumbled against my mouth, even as her fingers worked at the buttons of my shirt. The worst, I agreed, trailing kisses along her throat and making her arch against me. A branch snapped somewhere in the forest behind us, and we broke apart instantly, both reaching for our weapons before we'd even consciously processed the threat. But it was just a deer, spooked by some distant sound and crashing through the underbrush in its haste to escape. Still, the interruption was enough to bring reality crashing back. We should. Kira began, then trailed off, looking anywhere but at me. Yeah, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was agreeing to. We should get back to the hunt.
Right.
The hunt. She straightened her clothes with hands that weren't quite steady. 2 days left. May the best wolf win. But as I watched her gather her gear and prepare to head deeper into the forest, I realized the hunt was no longer the most important contest between us. The real question was whether we'd both survive whatever was building between us with our hearts and our packs intact. Chapter 6. I should have stayed away from her. After that kiss, that mind-melting, world-tilting kiss that had changed everything between us, the smart thing would have been to put as much distance as possible between myself and Kira Blackwood. Focus on the hunt, claim my victory, and deal with the impossible attraction later. Instead, I found myself tracking her through the pre-dawn darkness, following her scent trail with the single-minded determination of a wolf who'd found his mate. That thought stopped me cold.
Mate.
The word echoed through my mind with a resonance that made my wolf sit up and take notice. Not just attraction, not just desire, but the deep, primitive recognition that happened perhaps once in a lifetime. Fuck, I whispered to the empty forest. This wasn't just about territorial disputes or pack politics anymore. This was about the one thing that could destroy both our carefully constructed lives. The mate bond that wolves spent their entire lives hoping to find, and that always came at exactly the wrong time. I found her at dawn, crouched beside a stream in a small clearing where the morning mist rose like ghosts from the water. She had her back to me, but I knew she was aware of my presence. Her posture was too alert, too ready for action. "Stalking me now, Rivera?" she said without turning around. "That's either very romantic or very creepy, depending on your intentions." "Haven't decided yet," I admitted, stepping into the clearing. "How's the leg?" She stood and turned to face me, and I was relieved to see that the unhealthy flush of fever had faded. Her color was better, her movements more confident, though she still favored the injured limbs slightly.
Healing.
"Your field medicine was better than I expected from a spoiled alpha who probably never dressed his own wounds." "Spoiled?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'll have you know I've been patching up pack members since I was old enough to hold a needle steady." "Really?" Daddy didn't have servants for that kind of thing. The barb hit closer to home than she could have known. My father had been old school in a lot of ways, believing that an alpha's job was to lead and delegate, not to get his hands dirty with the messy details of pack life. "My father believed in leading from the front," I said carefully. "But he also believed that an alpha who couldn't take care of his pack in every way necessary wasn't worth following." Something shifted in her expression. "I didn't know about what kind of leader he was. The stories that reached us were probably true," I said with a bitter laugh. "Richard Rivera was a hard man who made hard choices. But he never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. Is that why you helped me? Following Daddy's example?" I looked at her, really looked, taking in the challenge in her amber eyes, the way she held herself ready for attack or retreat depending on my answer. She was testing me, probing for weakness, trying to reduce what was happening between us to something simple and explainable. "No," I said quietly. "I helped you because the thought of you dying alone in these woods made me want to burn the whole forest down. I helped you because somewhere in the last few days, you stopped being my enemy and became something I can't afford to lose." Her sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the clearing for a long moment. "Marcus, I know it's complicated. I know our packs would see it as betrayal. I know we're supposed to be competing for territory that means everything to both our people." I took a step closer, and she didn't back away. "But I also know that when I saw you bleeding and hurt, nothing else mattered except making sure you were okay." "This is insane," she whispered. "We can't. Our families have been enemies for generations. The territorial disputes, the old grudges, the politics that kept us apart when we were younger?" I interrupted. "The pack expectations that made us into rivals instead of whatever this is?" She was close enough now that I could see the pulse beating rapidly at her throat, could smell the subtle shift in her scent that meant she was as affected as I was. "There's no future in this, Marcus. Even if we wanted to try, which we can't, our packs would never accept it. Interpack relationships are complicated enough when there's no bad blood involved. And when there's territorial disputes and generations of mistrust? Impossible." But she was looking at my mouth as she said it, and her voice lacked conviction. "Good thing we're just talking about right now, then," I said, reaching out to trace the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "Not about futures or pack politics or anything beyond this moment." "Just this moment," she repeated, leaning into my touch despite herself. "Just this moment," I confirmed, lowering my head until my lips were barely brushing hers. "No promises, no expectations, no tomorrow." She kissed me like she was drowning and I was air, desperate and hungry, and full of the same need that was eating me alive. I backed her against a tree, seemed to be becoming our signature move, and lost myself in the taste of her, the feel of her hands fisted in my hair, the soft sounds she made when I found that sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder. "We're going to regret this," she gasped, even as she was pulling my shirt over my head. Probably, I agreed, working at the buttons of her jacket with hands that weren't entirely steady. But I'm tired of doing the smart thing all the time. Since when is Marcus Rivera not smart? She teased, nipping at my earlobe in a way that made my knees nearly buckle. Since he met a certain stubborn alpha who makes him forget everything except how much he wants her. The words hung between us, more honest than either of us was prepared for. I saw the moment they hit her, saw her expression change from playful to something deeper and more dangerous. "Marcus," she said softly, "what are we doing?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "But for the first time in months, I don't care about having a plan." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for something I wasn't sure I knew how to give her. Then she smiled, not her usual challenging smirk, but something softer and infinitely more devastating. "One moment at a time?" she asked. "One moment at a time," I agreed. This time when we kissed, it was slower, deeper, full of the acknowledgement that we were crossing a line neither of us knew how to uncross. Her jacket hit the ground, followed by my shirt, and then we were skin to skin in the morning sunlight, learning the geography of each other's bodies with hands and lips, and the kind of desperate tenderness that came from knowing this might be all we'd ever have. She was beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with her face or figure, in the way she moved like liquid mercury, the way she met every touch with equal passion, the way she looked at me like I was something worth wanting despite everything that should have kept us apart. When she arched beneath me, my name a prayer on her lips, I knew with crystal clarity that no matter what happened next, no matter who won the hunt or what our packs demanded or how impossible the politics became, this moment would be worth every consequence that followed. A howl echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakable. The signal for the final day of the hunt. We broke apart, breathing hard, the sound bringing reality crashing back like a physical blow. "The judges," Kira said, reaching for her clothes with hands that shook slightly. "They're calling for the final presentations."
Yeah.
I found my shirt, tried to pretend my whole world hadn't just shifted on its axis. We need to get back." "Right." She was already dressing, switching back into alpha mode with a speed that had always impressed and frustrated me in equal measure. "This doesn't change anything about the competition." "Nothing at all," I agreed, though we both knew it was a lie. Everything had changed. The hunt, the territory dispute, the careful balance of power between our packs. All of it was secondary now to the impossible thing growing between us. As we gathered our gear in silence, I caught her looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret? Longing? Fear? "Kira," I started. "Don't," she said quickly. "Whatever you're about to say, just don't. We both know what happens next. We go back to our packs, present our kills, and pretend this never happened." And if I don't want to pretend? The question stopped her cold. She turned to face me fully, and for a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped enough for me to see the real woman underneath. Vulnerable, conflicted, and just as lost as I was. "Then you're going to break both our hearts," she said quietly. "Because wanting something doesn't make it possible, Marcus. And some things are too dangerous to want." She was right, and we both knew it. But as I watched her walk away, heading back toward the boundary where our packs waited for judgment, I realized I was past caring about dangerous. I was already in love with her. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 7. The judging clearing buzzed with tension as both packs gathered for the final presentation. 7 days in the wilderness had culminated in this moment, the formal weighing and measuring that would determine who claimed the northern valleys permanently. I stood beside my elk, trying to project confidence, while my mind churned with everything that had happened. The successful hunt should have felt like vindication, proof that I was the alpha my pack needed. Instead, all I could think about was the taste of Kira's lips and the way she'd looked at me like I was her whole world, right before she'd walked away. "Impressive kill, son," Uncle Thomas said, running his hand along the elk's antlers. "Clean shot, perfect placement. Your father would be proud." The words should have meant everything to me. For months, I'd been fighting to prove I was worthy of the leadership that had fallen to me so young, worthy of the legacy my father had left behind. But standing here in the clearing where it had all started, I realized I didn't want to be my father. I wanted to be the kind of alpha who chose love over politics, who built bridges instead of maintaining ancient grudges. I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved Kira Blackwood. Marcus. Jake's concerned voice broke through my thoughts. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I muttered, then looked up as the crowd stirred.
Kira had arrived.
She entered the clearing like a conquering queen, head high and shoulders back despite the slight limp that betrayed her recent injury. Behind her, David and Sarah carried the evidence of her hunt, and my breath caught in my throat. 3 wild boars. The 2 we'd killed together, plus a third massive specimen that made even the largest of the other kills look small by comparison. Holy shit, Jake breathed. When did she take down that monster? I had no idea, but the size of the 3rd boar made my elk look like a practice target. She'd found something even larger in the time since we'd parted ways, and the implications hit me like a physical blow. She was going to win. Despite her injury, despite the infection that could have killed her, despite every advantage I'd thought I possessed, she was going to win, and I was going to lose everything my pack was counting on me to secure. Elder Morrison called for order, his aged voice carrying easily across the gathered wolves. We are here to witness the conclusion of trial by merit between Alpha Marcus Rivera of the Iron Moon Pack and Alpha Kira Blackwood of the Shadowpine Pack. Both alphas have returned within the appointed time, and both have presented evidence of successful hunts. The formal proceedings began with the measuring and weighing of each kill. My elk was substantial, nearly 400 pounds of prime venison that represented hours of careful tracking and a perfectly executed shot. But Kira's 3 boars together weighed over 800 pounds, and the largest specimen alone outweighed my elk by 100 pounds. It wasn't even close. The judgment is clear, Elder Morrison announced. Alpha Blackwood has presented the larger prey. The northern valleys belong permanently to the Shadowpine Pack. The words hit like a death sentence. Around me, I could feel my pack's disappointment, their faith in my leadership cracking like ice under pressure. Uncle Thomas's face was granite. Jake looked like he wanted to hit something, and Elena was staring at the ground like she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. I'd failed them, failed my father's legacy, failed the pack that had trusted me to secure our future. But all of that paled beside the look on Kira's face. She should have been triumphant. Should have been savoring her victory, claiming her prize with the satisfaction of a predator who'd outmaneuvered her opponent. Instead, she was looking at me with something that might have been regret or sorrow. Or, wait. The word escaped before I'd consciously decided to speak. Every head in the clearing turned toward me, and I felt the weight of expectation settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Marcus. Elder Morrison frowned. Do you wish to contest the judgment?
No.
I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything. I wished to concede. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My pack erupted in shocked protests, while the Shadowpines looked on in stunned silence. Through it all, Kira stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which maybe I had. Furthermore, I continued, raising my voice to be heard over the chaos. I wish to propose a formal alliance between the Iron Moon and Shadowpine packs. Dead silence fell over the clearing. An alliance? Elder Morrison's bushy eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Alpha Rivera, do you understand what you're suggesting? I understand perfectly. I stepped forward, addressing the gathered wolves but keeping my eyes on Kira. Our packs have been enemies for too long, fighting over territory and nursing ancient grudges while real threats gather strength around us. The rogue attacks that killed my father are spreading. The human development that's destroying our traditional hunting grounds isn't stopping. We can keep fighting each other over scraps, or we can work together to ensure our survival. This is insane, Uncle Thomas hissed. Marcus, think about what you're saying. An alliance with the Shadowpines? Your father would roll over in his grave. My father's dead, I said quietly, and the words carried more weight than I'd expected. He died fighting a threat that no single pack could handle alone. Maybe if we'd been working together instead of maintaining territorial boundaries, he'd still be alive. I could see the moment the truth of those words hit my pack members. We'd all been thinking it, but no one had been willing to say it out loud. The northern valleys are yours, Kira, I continued, finally addressing her directly. You won them fairly, and your pack needs the resources. But I'm offering something more valuable than hunting rights. I'm offering partnership. Shared borders, combined patrols, unified response to external threats. And what do the Shadow Pines get out of this arrangement? David Chen asked, his voice carefully neutral. Security. Resources. A pack alliance strong enough to face whatever comes next. I paused, then played my final card. And a formal end to the territorial disputes that have weakened both our packs for decades. Elder Morrison was shaking his head slowly. This is unprecedented, Alpha Rivera. Pack alliances of this magnitude require extensive negotiation, formal treaties, approval from the regional council. Then let's start the process. I turned to Kira, and my heart stopped at the expression on her face. What do you say, Alpha Blackwood? Ready to make history? She stood there for a long moment, every eye in the clearing fixed on her as she weighed my proposal. I could practically see the calculations running through her mind, the benefits and risks, the political implications, the sheer audacity of what I was suggesting. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. The Shadowpine Pack accepts Alpha Rivera's proposal for formal alliance negotiations. The clearing erupted again, this time with voices from both packs raised in protest, support, and general confusion. But I barely heard them over the thundering of my own heartbeat. She'd said yes. Against all odds, despite every reason she had to refuse, she'd said yes. Elder Morrison was calling for order again, trying to establish protocol for this unprecedented situation. Pack members were clustering around their respective alphas, demanding explanations and voicing concerns. But through it all, Kira and I stood watching each other across the clearing, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We'd just changed everything. The question was whether we destroyed ourselves in the process, or created something worth the chaos we'd unleashed. Chapter 8. The emergency pack meeting convened an hour after the formal judgment, and the conference room at Iron Moon headquarters had never felt more like a trial chamber. 15 of my most senior pack members sat around the oval table, their expressions ranging from confused to furious to deeply concerned. I'd been expecting this confrontation since the moment I'd announced the alliance proposal. What I hadn't been expecting was how calm I felt about it. Have you lost your goddamn mind? Uncle Thomas slammed his fist on the table, his control finally snapping after an hour of careful diplomacy. An alliance with the Shadowpines? They've been stealing from us, challenging our authority, undermining our territorial claims for years. And we've been doing the same to them, I pointed out. The territorial disputes have cost both packs resources, time, and focus we should have been using to address real threats. Real threats like the pack that just outmaneuvered you in formal competition? Beta Jake's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. Marcus, I've supported every decision you've made since you became Alpha, but this, I don't understand this. Elena Vasquez leaned forward, her tracker's instincts focused on details others might miss. There's something else going on here. Marcus, what happened during the hunt? What aren't you telling us? The question I'd been dreading hung in the air like a challenge. I could deflect, focus on the practical benefits of the alliance, keep my personal motivations hidden behind political necessity. Or I could trust my pack with the truth. Kira was injured, I said finally. Badly injured, early in the hunt. I found her with an infected wound that could have killed her. And Thomas's eyes were sharp, predatory. You should have left her to deal with the consequences of her own recklessness. I couldn't. Why not? The simple question contained layers of challenge, suspicion, and genuine confusion that I couldn't ignore any longer. Because I'm in love with her. The words fell into absolute silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. No one seemed to process what I'd just admitted. Then Jake laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor at all. "You're in love with her," he repeated slowly. "The woman who's been our primary territorial rival for 5 years. The alpha who just won hunting rights to our most valuable territory. The daughter of the man who killed 3 of our pack members in the border skirmishes of '97. Yes. And you think that's a good foundation for a political alliance?" "I think," I said carefully, "that personal feelings aside, the alliance makes strategic sense. But you're right, my judgment may be compromised by what's happened between us." Uncle Thomas was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "What's happened between you, Marcus? Please tell me you haven't." "We kissed," I interrupted before he could finish the accusation. "More than once. And if circumstances were different, if our packs weren't involved, I'd be pursuing a formal courtship." The explosion of voices was immediate and deafening. Half the pack members were shouting about betrayal and compromised leadership, while the others demanded details and explanations. Through it all, Jake sat in stunned silence, and I could see him putting together pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been showing him. "The medical supplies," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "When you got back from the hunt, you were missing half your medical kit. And you had scratches on your arms that weren't there when you left." I nodded. "I treated her injuries. She would have died otherwise. So, instead of letting your competitor eliminate herself through her own poor judgment, you saved her life, fell in love with her, lost the competition, and now want to form a political alliance that will benefit her pack more than ours." Elder Patricia Morrison, no relation to the council mediator, summed up the situation with brutal efficiency. "Is that an accurate assessment?" "It's more complicated than that." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like our alpha has been thinking with his dick instead of his brain." The crude assessment sparked another round of arguments, but I held up my hand for silence. When the room finally quieted, I stood and moved to the window that looked out over Iron Moon territory, the forests and valleys that had belonged to my family for generations. "You're right to question my judgment," I said without turning around. "You're right to wonder if personal feelings are clouding my political decisions. You're right to worry about the precedent this sets and the message it sends to other packs." I turned back to face them, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "But you're wrong if you think this alliance is just about my feelings for Kira. The rogue attacks are getting worse. We've lost 6 pack members in the last year, and the humans are investigating. The territorial disputes with the Shadow Pines have prevented us from properly addressing either threat. And the hunting rights we just lost? They were never sustainable long-term anyway, not with the development pressure on the eastern borders." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" I moved to the map mounted on the conference room wall, pointing to the northern valleys that had been the source of so much conflict. "Kira didn't just outmaneuver us in the hunt, she did her research. There's a proposed highway expansion that will cut right through the heart of those valleys within the next 5 years. The environmental impact studies are already underway. Even if I'd won the hunting rights, we would have lost them to human development before we could benefit." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "She knew," Elena breathed. "She knew the territory would be compromised, so she maneuvered us into a competition for land that was already doomed. More than that," I continued, "she positioned herself to offer us something more valuable: partnership in navigating the changing landscape. Combined pack territory that can better absorb development pressure, shared resources that make both packs more resilient, unified political voice in dealing with human authorities." Uncle Thomas was studying the map with new eyes. "The Alliance gives us access to their southern territories, which connect to the State Forest Preserve, protected land that can't be developed, and gives them access to our established relationships with the regional council and the supernatural community," Jake added, his beta instincts finally seeing the bigger picture. "It's not just about love or territory, it's about survival." "Exactly." I returned to my seat, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. My feelings for Kira may have influenced how I approach this, but the strategic value stands on its own merits. Elder Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me with sharp eyes. "So, what you're telling us is that you fell in love with the one woman smart enough to outthink you, strong enough to match you, and practical enough to offer you exactly what you need to secure your pack's future? Put that way, it sounded almost reasonable. That's one way to look at it, I admitted. And what does she get out of this arrangement? Elena asked. Besides political alliance and territorial concessions, what does Kira Blackwood gain from partnering with the pack she's been fighting for years? The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Because the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure. Kira was brilliant, calculating, and fiercely protective of her pack's interests. She wouldn't have agreed to alliance negotiations unless she saw clear benefits for the Shadowpines. But she'd also kissed me like her world depended on it, looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous, whispered my name like a prayer when we'd been alone in the forest. I think, I said slowly, she gains the same thing I do. A chance to choose love over politics, partnership over conflict, a future that's bigger than the grudges that shaped our past. And if you're wrong? Jake asked quietly. If this is all just political maneuvering on her part, and your feelings aren't reciprocated? I looked around the room at the faces of wolves who'd trusted me with their loyalty, their safety, their futures. They deserved honesty, even if it revealed my vulnerabilities. Then I'll have lost my heart to the most dangerous woman alive, I said. But I'll have gained an alliance that gives this pack the best chance of surviving whatever comes next. Either way, we're stronger than we were this morning. The room fell quiet as my pack members absorbed this assessment. I could see them weighing risks and benefits, personal loyalty against practical concerns, the future I was proposing against the familiar patterns of the past. Finally, Jake stood up. All in favor of proceeding with formal alliance negotiations? One by one, hands rose around the table. Not unanimous. Uncle Thomas and 2 others abstained, but enough to constitute pack consensus. Motion carries, Jake announced. Now comes the hard part. Actually making this work. As the meeting broke up and pack members filed out, still discussing the implications in low voices, Jake lingered behind. Marcus, he said when we were alone. Are you sure about this? All of it. The alliance, the woman, the future you're gambling, everything on. I thought about Kira's laugh in the morning sunlight, the way she'd trusted me with her vulnerability, the perfect synchronization when we'd hunted together. No, I admitted. I'm not sure about any of it. But I'm more sure about this than I've been about anything since I became Alpha. He nodded slowly. Then we'd better make damn sure it works. As he left, I remained at the conference room window, looking out over territory that would soon be shared with former enemies. The sun was setting, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson that reminded me of amber eyes and dangerous smiles. Tomorrow, formal negotiations would begin. Tomorrow, I'd have to prove that love and politics could coexist, that personal desires could align with pack necessities, that 2 enemies could become something more powerful than either had ever been alone. Tonight, I was just a wolf who'd bet everything on the impossible hope that Kira Blackwood might love him back. Chapter 9. The Shadowpine Pack headquarters looked like it was preparing for war. I stood at the entrance to their compound, taking in the increased security, the suspicious glares from pack members, and the general atmosphere of barely controlled hostility that seemed to radiate from every building. 3 days had passed since the hunt concluded and the alliance proposal was made public, and it was clear that not everyone on Kira's side was as enthusiastic about negotiating as their alpha had been. Second thoughts. Jake asked quietly from beside me. Too late for those, I replied, adjusting my formal jacket one last time. We'd dressed carefully for this first negotiating session, professional but not submissive, respectful but not weak. First impressions would matter, especially with pack members who'd been raised to see us as enemies. David Chin emerged from the main building, his expression neutral, but his body language tense. Alpha Rivera, Beta Morrison. Alpha Blackwood is waiting for you in the conference room. As we followed him through the compound, I couldn't help comparing it to Iron Moon headquarters, where our territory emphasized tradition and permanence, stone buildings, heavy furniture, portraits of previous alphas. The Shadowpines had built for adaptability and efficiency. Modern architecture, Flexible spaces, technology integrated seamlessly into every room. It was impressive. It was also intimidating as hell. The conference room was a study in controlled power. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over forest that stretched to the horizon, while a massive table dominated the center of the space. Kira sat at the head of the table like she owned the world, which in this room, she essentially did. She dressed for war in a different way than her pack members. Sleek black suit that emphasized her authority, hair pulled back in a severe bun that exposed the elegant line of her throat, minimal jewelry except for the alpha ring that marked her status. She looked every inch the successful pack leader, dangerous and untouchable. She also looked like she hadn't slept since the hunt ended. "Marcus," she said formally, rising to greet us. "Beta Morrison. Thank you for coming." The use of my first name instead of my title was noted by everyone in the room, though whether it signified familiarity or disrespect depended on who was interpreting. Alpha Blackwood. I kept my own greeting formal, professional. "We appreciate your willingness to explore this alliance." "Explore being the operative word," said a voice from the corner. I turned to see Elena Blackwood, Kira's great-aunt, studying me with sharp eyes that missed nothing. At 78, she was one of the most respected wolves in the region, and her presence at these negotiations lent them serious political weight. "And Elena," Kira said with a warning tone. "No, it's a fair point," the older woman continued. "Alliance negotiations between historically antagonistic packs require more than good intentions and sudden inspiration. They require trust, which must be earned through demonstrated commitment over time." She stood and moved to the window, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor with deliberate rhythm. "The question before us today is simple. What are you really offering, Alpha Rivera? And what are you really asking for in return?" I'd prepared for this. The past 3 days had been spent in intensive strategy sessions with my own advisors, mapping out terms and conditions that would benefit both packs, while protecting our essential interests. But looking at Kira across that conference table, remembering the way she'd felt in my arms just days ago, all my carefully prepared talking points seemed inadequate. "We're offering partnership," I said finally. "Shared resources, coordinated territorial management, unified response to external threats, an end to the conflicts that have weakened both our packs, and a chance to build something stronger together." "Pretty words," Sarah Winters observed from her seat to Kira's left. "But what does that look like in practice? Which pack gets priority access to disputed hunting grounds? Who has final authority in joint operations? How do we resolve conflicts when our interests don't align?" Jake leaned forward, pulling out the folder we'd prepared. "We've drafted a preliminary framework that addresses those concerns." For the next 2 hours, we worked through the practical details of pack alliance. Territorial boundaries, resource-sharing agreements, joint patrol schedules, emergency response protocols. It was tedious, complicated work that required careful negotiation of every clause and condition. It was also a dance of power and trust that had very little to do with the actual words being spoken. I watched Kira throughout the session, noting the way she listened to her advisors but made her own decisions, the way she pushed back on terms that disadvantaged her pack, while remaining open to compromise on less critical issues. She was brilliant at this, patient, strategic, never revealing more than she intended. She was also completely avoiding eye contact with me. "I think that's enough for today," she announced when we'd reached agreement on basic territorial sharing. "We'll need time to review these preliminary terms with our respective packs before we can move forward." Of course, I agreed, though I could feel opportunities slipping away with every moment of formal distance between us. As the meeting broke up and pack members filed out, I lingered, hoping for a chance to speak with her privately. But Kira was already moving toward the door, clearly intent on avoiding any personal conversation. "Alpha Blackwood," I called out before she could escape. "A moment, please." She paused, her back to me, tension visible in every line of her body. When she turned around, her expression was carefully neutral. "What is it, Alpha Rivera?" The formality stung more than it should have. 3 days ago, she'd been whispering my name against my skin. Now she could barely look at me. "We need to talk. Privately." I don't think that's appropriate during ongoing negotiations. Kira, please. Alpha Blackwood, she corrected sharply. And no, we don't need to talk privately. Whatever you have to say can be said through proper channels. The rejection hit like a physical blow. I could feel Jake's curious gaze on me, along with the interested attention of the few remaining Shadowpine pack members. Fine, I said quietly. But this won't work if we can't communicate honestly with each other. This will work if we both keep our priorities straight, she replied. My priority is my pack's welfare. I suggest you focus on yours. Then she was gone, leaving me standing in that conference room feeling like I'd been slapped. That went well, Jake observed dryly. Shut up. I'm just saying, for a woman who's supposedly in love with you, she's doing a really good job of pretending otherwise. I turned on him, anger and frustration boiling over. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe you were wrong about her feelings. Maybe this alliance proposal was exactly what she wanted, political advantage wrapped up in romantic gestures that made you look like the one pushing for personal reasons. The words hit too close to fears I'd been trying to suppress since the moment I'd made the alliance proposal public. That's not. I started then stopped. Because the truth was, I didn't know what Kira's motivations were anymore. The woman who'd kissed me like her world depended on it seemed like a stranger compared to the alpha who'd just dismissed me with professional courtesy. Come on, Jake said more gently. Let's go home. We've got our own pack meeting to prepare for. As we left the Shadowpine compound, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life.
Chapter 10.
The emergency session of the Regional Pack Council had been called for midnight, a time when political tensions ran high and rational thinking ran low. I sat in the circular chamber where Kira and I had first clashed publicly, but this time the stakes were infinitely higher. Word of our proposed alliance had spread through the supernatural community like wildfire, and the reaction had been swift and overwhelmingly negative. This is unprecedented, declared Alpha Morrison of the Northern Ridge Pack, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd held power for 3 decades. Interpack alliances of this scope haven't been attempted since the territorial wars of the 1800s, and for good reason. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Representatives from 7 regional packs had gathered to discuss what they clearly saw as a threat to the established order. The balance of power in this region has been maintained through careful territorial boundaries and limited pack interactions, continued Alpha Sarah Cross of the Mountain View Pack. What you're proposing could destabilize everything we've built. I stood to address the assembly, feeling the weight of their disapproval like a physical force. With respect, the system you're defending has been slowly killing us all. Territorial disputes drain resources that should be used for genuine threats. Isolation leaves us vulnerable to rogue attacks and human encroachment. The old ways aren't working anymore. So, your solution is to throw out centuries of tradition for an untested alliance with a pack your family has been feuding with for generations. Alpha Morrison's question carried layers of challenge and genuine concern. My solution is to choose adaptation over extinction. The blunt response sparked angry voices throughout the chamber. I let them vent their outrage for a moment, then raised my hand for silence. 5 packs in this region have lost members to rogue attacks in the past year. I continued when the noise died down. 3 have had territorial boundaries compromised by human development. 2 are struggling with declining birth rates and young adults leaving for more stable communities. I looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each alpha in turn. We can keep pretending these are individual problems, or we can acknowledge that we're all facing the same challenges and start working together to address them. And you think an alliance with the Shadowpines is the answer? Alpha Cross's tone was skeptical. They're hardly the most stable pack in the region. Kira Blackwood has been alpha for less than 3 years, and she's already been involved in more territorial disputes than any other pack leader. The criticism of Kira sparked something protective and dangerous in my chest. Alpha Blackwood has been defending her pack's interests against aggression from multiple neighbors, including my own pack. She's shown remarkable leadership under pressure and a willingness to find creative solutions to complex problems. Creative solutions like stealing your hunting rights? Alpha Morrison asked with a knowing smile. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the chamber knew the basic facts. Kira had outmaneuvered me legally, won the formal hunt, and claimed valuable territory that had belonged to my family for generations. What they didn't know was the rest of the story. She didn't steal anything, I said quietly. She reclaimed territory that we'd failed to defend properly, using methods that were completely within traditional law. The fault was mine for allowing pack leadership transitions to interfere with essential territorial maintenance. And now you want to reward her for that victory with a formal alliance? I want to learn from it. I moved to the center of the chamber, addressing the entire assembly. Kira Blackwood saw an opportunity where I saw only obligation. She identified resources where I saw only problems. She found solutions where I was stuck in patterns that no longer served my pack's needs. I paused, knowing that what I said next would either convince them or destroy any chance of the alliance moving forward. She's exactly the kind of leader this region needs more of. Smart enough to see past old grudges, strong enough to challenge established power structures, practical enough to prioritize results over pride. The chamber fell silent. In the space of that quiet, I could feel the shift in political winds, the moment when admiration becomes suspicion and respect becomes fear. You're in love with her. The accusation came from Alpha Cross, spoken with the certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. I could have denied it, could have deflected, made jokes about political strategy and practical necessity, could have protected myself behind the kind of careful diplomatic language that avoided uncomfortable truths. Instead, I decided to burn every bridge I had left. Yes, I said simply. I am. The explosion of voices was immediate and deafening. Accusations of compromised judgment, political manipulation, and violated pack trust flew from every corner of the chamber. Through it all, I stood calmly in the center, waiting for the storm to pass. When Elder Morrison finally restored order, his expression was grim. Alpha Rivera, he said formally, do you understand that what you've just admitted calls into question not only this proposed alliance, but your fitness to lead your pack? I understand that you think it should, I replied. But I disagree. My feelings for Kira Blackwood don't compromise my judgment. They clarify it. I've seen her leadership firsthand, worked with her under pressure, witnessed her commitment to her pack's welfare. I'm not proposing this alliance because I love her. I love her because she's the kind of alpha worth building a future with. And if she doesn't return those feelings? Alpha Morrison asked, if this is all one-sided political maneuvering on your part? The question I'd been dreading, the fear that had been eating at me since Kira's cold dismissal at the negotiating table. Then I'll have made a mistake that costs me personally, I admitted. But the alliance will still benefit both our packs, and the region will still be stronger for having one less territorial dispute to worry about. Or, Alpha Cross interjected, you'll have destabilized the entire regional power structure for a woman who's played you perfectly. Before I could respond, the chamber doors opened and Kira walked in. She moved with purpose and authority, dressed in the formal ceremonial leathers that marked this as official pack business. Behind her came David Chun and Sarah Winters, their expressions suggesting they were prepared for battle. I apologize for interrupting, Kira said, her voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent chamber. But I understand you're discussing matters that concern my pack. Elder Morrison gestured to an empty chair. Alpha Blackwood. We were just discussing the proposed alliance and its implications. Implications? Kira's eyebrow arched dangerously. What implications would those be? The question of whether personal relationships between pack leaders compromise their ability to negotiate in their pack's best interests, Alpha Morrison explained carefully. Kira's gaze found mine across the chamber, and for the first time in days, she looked at me directly. What I saw in her amber eyes made my heart race and my wolf sit up in hopeful attention. I see, she said softly. And what conclusion have you reached? We're concerned that Alpha Rivera's feelings may have influenced his judgment regarding this alliance. His feelings? Kira's voice carried a dangerous edge that I recognized from our confrontations in the forest. And what about my feelings? Does anyone here think I'm incapable of negotiating in my pack's best interests? The chamber fell silent again, but this time the quality of the quiet was different. Charged. Dangerous. Because if that's the case, Kira continued, moving to stand beside me in the center of the chamber, then you clearly don't know me very well. She turned to face the assembled alphas, and when she spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of a leader who would not be questioned. I am Kira Blackwood, Alpha of the Shadowpine Pack, daughter of James Blackwood and granddaughter of the woman who first claimed our territory through right of conquest. I have never made a decision that didn't put my pack's welfare first, and I'm not going to start now. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the chamber. The alliance with the Iron Moon Pack benefits my people. It strengthens our territorial security, improves our resource base, and positions us to better handle future challenges. Those are the reasons I'm supporting it. Another pause, and I held my breath. The fact that I'm in love with Marcus Rivera is irrelevant to those strategic calculations. Although it doesn't hurt that the man I love happens to be smart enough to see past old grudges and strong enough to put his pack's future ahead of his pride. The words hit me like lightning. She'd just declared her feelings publicly, in front of the most powerful alphas in the region, staking her reputation and political standing on our relationship. However, she continued, and her voice turned deadly quiet, if anyone here thinks they can use our personal relationship to undermine either of our packs, they're welcome to try. I'd be happy to demonstrate why that would be a mistake. The threat was unmistakable, and the silence that followed it was absolute. Finally, Elder Morrison cleared his throat. Well, he said dryly, I think that settles the question of motivation. Chapter 11. The rogue attack came at dawn, just as Kira and I were finalizing the last details of our alliance treaty. The emergency howl that split the morning air was unmistakable, the desperate call of a pack under assault, broadcasting a plea for help that every wolf within 50 miles would hear. But this wasn't just any pack in trouble. It was the Mountain View Pack, whose alpha had been one of our harshest critics just days earlier. Shit, Kira breathed, looking up from the documents spread across my kitchen table. We'd been working since before sunrise, trying to complete the formal alliance papers before the regional council could find new ways to block them. How many rogues do you think? I asked, already moving toward my weapons cabinet. From the sound of that howl? More than they can handle alone. She was pulling on her jacket, checking her sidearm with the efficient movements of someone who'd faced combat before. We need to respond. I paused in loading silver ammunition into my rifle. Kira, they're not our responsibility. Mountain View has made it clear they don't want our help or our alliance. Her amber eyes flashed with something between anger and disappointment. So, we let them die because they disagreed with us politically? The question hit harder than it should have. Because she was right, Alpha Cross and her pack had been vocal opponents of our alliance, had questioned our judgment and motivations publicly. It would be easy to let them handle their own problems, to prove that isolation and traditional boundaries left packs vulnerable. It would also be exactly the kind of thinking that had kept our packs weak and divided for generations. You're right, I said, slinging my rifle across my back. But if we do this, we do it together. Joint operation, shared command, unified response. Together, she agreed, and the smile that crossed her face was fierce and beautiful. Let's go save some ungrateful wolves. The drive to Mountain View territory took 20 minutes that felt like hours. We'd called our respective betas, coordinating a joint response that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Jake was bringing 6 Iron Moon warriors, while David Chun was mobilizing 8 Shadowpines. Combined with whatever Mountain View forces were still operational, it might be enough. If we weren't too late. The first thing I noticed when we reached the Mountain View compound was the smell, smoke, blood, and the acrid scent of fear that lingered in the air like a visible cloud. The second thing was the silence. No emergency howls, no sounds of ongoing battle, nothing but the ominous quiet that could mean either victory or complete defeat. Movement, Kira whispered, pointing toward the main lodge. I followed her gaze and saw them. 3 figures moving with a peculiar coordination that marked them as rogues. Wolves who'd lost their pack bonds, their connection to civilized behavior, their basic humanity. They were more animal than human now, driven by instincts that recognized only prey and predator. "Where's our backup?" I muttered, checking my watch. "Jake and David should have arrived by now." "Doesn't matter," Kira replied, drawing her sidearm. "3 civilians just ran into that building. We can't wait." She was right, and we both knew it. Whatever had happened to our reinforcements, innocent lives were at stake right now. "Standard urban combat protocols?" I asked. "You take point, I'll cover," she confirmed. "Watch for crossfire zones and remember, rogues don't negotiate." We moved across the compound's central courtyard like we'd been tactical partners for years instead of enemies for decades. Kira matched my pace perfectly, providing cover fire when rogues appeared in windows, coordinating her movements with mine like we shared the same mind. The main lodge was a maze of smoke and shadows, with the distinctive sounds of terrified civilians huddled somewhere deeper in the building. I could hear at least 2 separate groups, one upstairs, one in what sounded like a basement or a storm shelter. "I'll take the upper level," Kira whispered as we reached the main staircase.
No.
"Too dangerous to separate." Marcus. Her hand on my arm stopped my protest. "Trust me, I can handle 3 rogues, and those people upstairs don't have time for us to clear every room methodically." She was right, but every instinct I possessed was screaming against letting her go into danger alone. The mate bond that had been growing stronger every day we spent together was howling in protest at the separation. "Be careful," I said finally. "Always am." She rose on her toes to press a quick kiss to my lips. "See you on the other side, Rivera." Then she was gone, moving up the stairs with a fluid grace that had always taken my breath away. I forced myself to focus on my own mission, following the sounds of frightened voices toward what I hoped was the basement entrance. I found them huddled in a storm shelter beneath the lodge's kitchen. Alpha Cross, 3 pack members, and 2 human civilians who'd had the misfortune to be visiting when the attack began. Cross herself was injured, a deep gash across her forehead that spoke of a close encounter with rogue claws. "Rivera?" She blinked in disbelief as I appeared in the shelter doorway. "What are you doing here?" "Helping," I said simply, then turned to assess the group's condition. "How many rogues total?" 6, maybe 7. They hit us just after dawn, coordinated assault that took out our perimeter guards before we could organize a defense. Cross struggled to sit up straighter, alpha pride warring with obvious gratitude. "Most of my pack is either dead or scattered." "Not anymore." I helped her to her feet, noting the way she favored her left side. "Shadowpine and Iron Moon forces are en route. We're getting you out of here." The sound of gunfire from upstairs made my blood run cold.
Kira.
"Stay here," I ordered the civilians. "Alpha Cross, can you fight?" "Try and stop me," she growled, though I could see the effort it took her to remain upright. We made our way back upstairs, Cross covering my 6 despite her injuries. The smoke was thicker now, and the sounds of combat had moved toward the lodge's main entrance. I found Kira pinned behind an overturned table, trading shots with 2 rogues who had her trapped in the main hall. A 3rd rogue lay motionless near the stairs, evidence of her earlier success. "Kira," I called out, drawing the rogue's attention long enough for her to change position. "About time," she shouted back, putting a silver bullet through the nearest rogue's chest. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost." "Never," I replied, flanking the remaining rogue and ending the fight with a clean headshot. Silence fell over the lodge, broken only by our heavy breathing and the distant sound of approaching vehicles. "Everyone alive?" Kira asked, checking herself for injuries. "Define alive," Alpha Cross said dryly, limping out from behind her cover. "But yes, thanks to you too, we're breathing." The sound of multiple car engines reached us, followed by the familiar voices of our respective packs. Jake's tactical assessment was followed by David's coordinated sweep of the compound, both men working together with an efficiency that spoke of growing partnership between our packs. "All clear," Jake reported as he entered the lodge. 7 rogues total, all neutralized. Some by us, some by... He looked around at the bodies Kira and I had left behind. "Some by people who got here first." Joint operation, I explained. Alpha Blackwood took point on civilian evacuation while I handled the basement group. We worked together, Kira added, and I caught the emphasis she placed on the word together. Alpha Cross was staring at both of us with an expression I couldn't quite read. You came, she said finally. After everything I said at the council meeting, after the way I questioned your alliance, you still came. Of course we came, Kira replied matter-of-factly. Your pack, even if you're not our pack. That means something. Besides, I added, someone needed to demonstrate what cooperative pack relations actually look like in practice. The words were gentle, but the implication was clear. The old ways, territorial isolation, suspicious competition, refusal to assist neighboring packs, had left Mountain View vulnerable to an attack they couldn't handle alone. The alliance, Cross said slowly. It's not just about territory sharing, is it? It's about mutual defense, coordinated response, the kind of cooperation that turns individual packs into something stronger. That's the idea, Kira confirmed. Though we're still working out the details. Cross nodded thoughtfully, then winced as the movement aggravated her head wound. When you're ready for those negotiations, Mountain View would like to be included. The statement hung in the air like a gift neither of us had expected. You want to join the alliance? I asked carefully. I want to make sure my pack never goes through this alone again, Cross replied firmly. Today proved that isolation isn't protection, it's vulnerability. If you'll have us, we'd like to explore what partnership looks like. I looked at Kira, seeing my own amazement reflected in her amber eyes. One emergency response had just transformed our two-pack alliance into something potentially much larger. We'll have you, Kira said warmly. Welcome to the new way forward. As paramedics arrived to treat the wounded and our combined forces began cleanup operations, I found myself standing beside Kira in the Mountain View compound's courtyard, watching two packs work together like they'd been doing it for years. Think it'll work? She asked quietly. All of this, the alliance, the cooperation, the idea that we can actually change decades of territorial thinking? Today worked, I pointed out. We responded faster together than either pack could have managed alone. We fought better as partners than we ever did as rivals. We saved lives that would have been lost if we'd stuck to traditional territorial boundaries. And, personally, her voice was softer now, meant only for me. How's that working out? I turned to face her fully, taking in the smoke stains on her jacket, the determined set of her jaw, the way she'd fought beside me like we were two halves of the same warrior. Personally, I said, reaching out to take her hand, I think I found my partner in everything that matters. Her smile was radiant despite the blood and dirt that marked the morning's battle. Good, she said, squeezing my fingers. Because I'm not planning to let you go anywhere, Rivera. Wouldn't dream of it, Blackwood. As if choreographed, we both turned to watch our packs working together, building something new from the ashes of old conflicts. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. And sometimes, possible was enough. Chapter 12. 6 months later. The wedding was nothing like either of our packs had expected. Instead of the formal, traditional ceremony that protocol demanded, we'd chosen to hold it outdoors in the neutral territory where we'd first hunted together. Instead of separate pack seating and ancient territorial divisions, the guests were mingled together. Iron Moons and Shadow Pines, Mountain Views and Northern Ridges, all the packs that had joined our growing alliance. Instead of enemies glaring at each other across political divisions, I saw friends and family celebrating something that had seemed impossible just months ago. You ready for this? Jake asked, adjusting my formal jacket one last time. I've been ready since the day she pinned me against that tree in her territory, I admitted. Which time? David Chen asked with a grin. Kira's beta had become a close friend over the past months, our professional relationship deepening into genuine partnership as our packs integrated more completely. All of them, I replied and meant it. The processional music began, not traditional wedding marches, but something wild and beautiful that Kira had chosen herself. As the assembled guests rose to their feet, my heart started racing in anticipation. Then she appeared at the far end of the natural aisle, and everything else ceased to matter. She wasn't wearing white. Instead, she'd chosen deep forest green that brought out her eyes and flowed around her like liquid mercury. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, crowned with a simple circlet of silver that caught the afternoon sunlight. She looked like a woodland goddess, powerful and beautiful and absolutely radiant. She looked like home. Uncle Thomas, who was officiating despite his initial reservations about the match, smiled as she approached. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here to witness something that many thought impossible, the joining of two hearts that were supposed to be enemies." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Our love story had become pack legend over the past months, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Marcus Rivera and Kira Blackwood have chosen love over politics, partnership over competition, unity over division, Thomas continued. In doing so, they've shown all of us that the strongest bonds are forged not despite our differences, but because of them. I barely heard the formal words of the ceremony. All my attention was focused on the woman standing beside me, on the way she smiled when I slipped the ring onto her finger, on the promise in her amber eyes when she spoke her vows. "I promise to be your partner in all things," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "Your equal in leadership, your ally in battle, your comfort in peace. I promise to challenge you when you need challenging, support you when you need support, and love you through everything life brings us." When my turn came, I looked into her eyes and spoke from my heart. "I promise to see you as you are, brilliant, dangerous, impossible, and perfect. I promise to trust your strength, respect your judgment, and never try to change the things that make you uniquely yourself. I promise to love you not despite our complicated history, but because that history led us here. By the power vested in me by pack law and supernatural tradition," Uncle Thomas announced, "I now pronounce you mate bonded for life. You may kiss your alpha." The last part was a departure from tradition. Usually it was the male alpha who was acknowledged first. But we'd rewritten a lot of traditions over the past months. When I kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers and howls that echoed through the forest like a song. But I barely noticed them. All I could focus on was the way she kissed me back, fierce and joyful and full of the promise of everything we'd build together. "So," she murmured against my lips, "what now, husband?" "Now," I said, taking her hand and turning to face our assembled family and friends, "we change the world." The reception that followed was a celebration unlike anything the supernatural community had seen. Pack boundaries dissolved as wolves who'd been rivals for generations shared food, stories, and the kind of deep bonds that came from working toward common goals. Alpha Cross, fully recovered from her injuries and now one of our closest allies, raised a toast to Marcus and Kira, who proved that the best leaders are the ones brave enough to choose love over fear. Elder Patricia Morrison, who'd become an unexpected supporter once she saw the practical benefits of our alliance, added her own words to partnerships that make us all stronger and to the courage it takes to build something new. But it was Jake who offered the toast that meant the most to me. "To my alpha and his mate," he said, raising his glass high, "who taught us all that enemies can become family, rivals can become partners, and love can be the strongest foundation for any future worth building." As the celebration continued around us, Kira and I slipped away to a quiet spot overlooking the valley where we'd first hunted together. The setting sun painted the forest in shades of gold and crimson, and in the distance, I could see the boundaries that no longer divided our territory but united it. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling against my side with the natural grace that still took my breath away. "About which part?" "Falling in love with my enemy? Proposing a political alliance based on personal feelings? Completely restructuring centuries of pack relations?" "All of it," she said with a laugh. "The whole impossible, complicated mess we've created." I considered the question seriously, looking out over the valley that now belonged to both our packs, thinking about the alliance that had grown from 2 packs to 5 and showed no signs of slowing, remembering the way we'd fought together to save lives and build something better. "No," I said finally. "No regrets at all. You Just one, she said, and my heart skipped a beat until she continued. I regret it took us so long to figure out that we were better together than we ever were apart. We were young, I pointed out.
And stubborn.
And convinced that our family's expectations mattered more than what we wanted. And now I know that the only expectations that matter are the ones we set for ourselves. I pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, the wild sweetness that had always driven my wolf crazy with want. And I expect this marriage to be the most beautiful disaster two alphas have ever created. Her laughter was music in the growing twilight. Beautiful disaster. I like that. Good, I said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Because we're just getting started, Mrs. Rivera Blackwood. Co-alpha Rivera Blackwood, she corrected with a grin. We're going to hyphenate everything, remember? Names, territories, pack structures, the whole traditional system. How could I forget? We're revolutionaries now. Revolutionaries, she agreed, then turned in my arms to face me fully. So, what's our next impossible goal? World peace? Ending supernatural prejudice? Teaching my great-aunt to like you? Let's start small, I suggested. How about we focus on building a marriage that's as strong as our alliance? Creating a partnership that lasts longer than our individual lives? Maybe raising some cubs who think it's completely normal for former enemies to be disgustingly in love. Her smile was radiant in the fading light. Cubs, huh? Plural? At least 3, I said, surprising myself with how right that sounded. Maybe 4. A nice big pack of our own. Marcus Rivera, are you planning to domesticate me? Never, I said firmly. I'm planning to be wild with you. There's a difference. She kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promises about the future we'd build together. When we finally broke apart, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Come on, she said, taking my hand and pulling me to my feet. We should get back to our wedding reception before our guests start to worry. Let them worry, I replied, but I followed her back toward the lights and laughter that marked our celebration. They'll figure out eventually that we can take care of ourselves. And each other, she added. And each other, I agreed. As we walked back toward our family and friends, toward the life we'd chosen to build together despite every obstacle the world had thrown at us, I realized that the hunt that had brought us together had never really ended. We were still hunting for solutions to pack problems, for ways to bridge old divisions, for the daily miracle of loving someone who challenged us to be better than we ever thought possible. But now we were hunting together, and that made all the difference. The moon rose full and bright over our celebration, blessing the union of 2 packs, 2 hearts, 2 souls who'd found their way from enemies to lovers to partners for life. It was the beginning of everything we'd never dared to dream. And it was perfect. Epilogue. The pack council meeting was running late, as usual when all 7 allied packs tried to coordinate major decisions. I sat at the head of the conference table in what had become the permanent headquarters for the Northwestern Pack Alliance, watching Kira moderate a heated discussion about territory expansion with the patience of someone who'd learned that the best leaders listen more than they spoke. She was brilliant at this, finding common ground between conflicting interests, building consensus from chaos, turning former rivals into collaborators. The alliance that had started as a desperate gamble between 2 packs had grown into the most successful supernatural coalition in North America. The motion carries, she announced as the final vote was tallied. The Coastal Pack's application for membership is approved, pending completion of integration protocols. A cheer went up from the newest applicants, who'd driven 8 hours to make their formal presentation. That brought our total to 8 packs, nearly 3,000 wolves working together for mutual benefit and protection. Not bad for a couple of enemies who'd started out fighting over hunting rights. Meeting adjourned, I called out, and the formal atmosphere immediately relaxed into the easy camaraderie that had developed between pack leaders over the years. As the various alphas and betas gathered their papers and began planning dinner arrangements, Kira caught my eye from across the table. The look she gave me was loaded with meaning. Tonight was special and we both knew it. Heading home, Jake asked as he packed up his files. He'd been elected as the Alliance's first interpack coordinator, a position that suited his diplomatic skills perfectly. Eventually, I replied, watching Kira say goodbye to the visiting pack representatives. We've got a stop to make first. The valley. The valley. He smiled knowingly. Every year on our wedding anniversary, Kira and I returned to the place where we'd first hunted together, where we'd first kissed, where we'd first admitted that enemies could become something infinitely more dangerous and beautiful. It had become our tradition, a private celebration before the pack party that would consume the rest of the weekend. An hour later, we were hiking through the familiar forest paths that led to our special place. 5 years had changed a lot of things, but this valley remained exactly as we'd found it, wild, pristine, untouched by the development that had claimed so much territory elsewhere. Remember when you thought I was trying to steal your hunting rights? Kira asked as we settled on the fallen log where she'd been bleeding and stubborn the day I'd first helped her. You were stealing my hunting rights, I pointed out. Very successfully, as I recall. Best decision I ever made, she said with a grin. Well, second best. What was the first? Marrying you, obviously. I leaned over to kiss her, still amazed after 5 years that I got to do this whenever I wanted. She tasted like home and adventure, safety and danger, everything I'd never known I needed until I found it in her. So, she said when we broke apart, ready for your anniversary present? I thought we agreed no presents this year, I protested. The new headquarters building was expensive enough. This didn't cost anything, she said, pulling something small from her jacket pocket. Well, not money anyway. She handed me a small wrapped package, and my heart started racing before I'd even opened it. Because I knew that look in her eyes, knew what news could make her practically vibrate with excitement and nervousness. Inside the wrapping paper was a tiny onesie, soft yellow fabric with Future Alpha, embroidered across the front in silver thread. Kira, I breathed, looking up at her with wonder. Surprise, she said, and her smile was radiant. We're having a cub, due in about 7 months, if the pack doctor's calculations are right. I stared at the little garment in my hands, at the woman who'd given me everything I'd never dared to hope for, at the future we'd built from the ashes of old conflicts. A cub, I repeated, still trying to process the news. Our cub, she confirmed. The first of many, if you're still planning on that nice big pack you mentioned at our wedding. I stood up and pulled her into my arms, spinning her around in a circle, while she laughed with pure joy. When I finally set her down, I kept her close, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. I love you, I said, and the words carried 5 years of partnership, adventure, challenge, and growing deeper every day. I love you too, she replied. Even if you're the most impossible man I've ever met. Impossible enough to fall in love with his enemy? Impossible enough to change the world with her, she corrected, and kissed me under the rising moon. As we held each other in the valley where our story had begun, surrounded by territory that now belonged to both our packs and protected by an alliance that had transformed the entire region, I thought about the cubs we'd raise, the future we'd build, the love that had grown from rivalry into something stronger than either of us had ever imagined. We'd started as enemies and become lovers. Now we were partners, mates, leaders, and soon-to-be parents. And we were just getting started. The hunt would continue, for new solutions, better alliances, ways to keep building the world our children would inherit. But whatever challenges came next, we'd face them together. Always together. The end.